Carter had never imagined that her third month as a nurse would end like this. The night at Vincent Medical Center had begun like any other. The soft hum of fluorescent lights, the faint smell of antiseptic in the hallways, and the occasional beep of a heart monitor in an empty room. Most of the night had been quiet, the kind of night that allowed her to get familiar with the hospital layout, learn which patients preferred their blinds drawn, and memorize the various quirks of her colleagues. She was organizing medications when the piercing sirens of the ambulance bay shattered the calm. Within seconds, the doors swung open, and a stretcher barreled through the sliding glass doors. A man, barely conscious, drenched in blood, 20 gunshot wounds crisscrossing his body, was rushed into the trauma bay. His body was pale, mottled with bruises and the stains of his own blood, and yet somehow he was still alive. Breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, trying to take in the chaos. Senior staff members were barking orders, scrambling to prepare blood bags, intubation kits, and surgical instruments. She recognized the urgency instantly. This was no ordinary trauma case. Her eyes darted over the man's face, partially obscured by a mask of coagulated blood, but even in the dim light she could make out the sharp jawline, the tense muscles of someone trained for survival. The name tag dangling from his IV stand read Logan Pierce, Navy SEAL. Had seen war injuries on TV documentaries, in military magazines, even in her textbooks, but this was real, and he was alive. 24-year-old male, 20 GSWs, priority 1, shouted a doctor as he grabbed by the shoulder, directing her to assist. Hands trembled. She was only a rookie, barely 3 months out of nursing school, but in that instant she realized she had no choice but to step up. She glanced at Logan's chart as she adjusted the IV line and stabilized the oxygen mask. "We're going to get through this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of calm she didn't feel. The trauma team worked in perfect chaos. Blood soaked the floor. Alarms from monitors created a relentless soundtrack, and found herself holding a hand against one of Logan's gaping wounds, applying pressure while simultaneously inserting a catheter. She had been trained for emergencies, but nothing in school could have prepared her for someone literally fighting death in front of her. Every second mattered. "BP dropping, need blood now," a nurse shouted. Didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest bag of O-negative blood and started a rapid transfusion. The adrenaline surged through her veins as her hands moved automatically, guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Logan's eyelids flickered, and he let out a faint groan. Leaned closer to speak to him. "Stay with me. You're going to make it, I've got you," she said softly. He didn't respond, but she felt a faint twitch in his hand. That was enough. That small sign of life, barely perceptible, anchored her resolve. Hours passed in a blur, and the trauma team fought against overwhelming odds. 2 times Logan flatlined. The room erupted with urgency each time, doctors and nurses working feverishly to bring him back. His voice guided him through each critical moment. "Breathe, Logan, fight with me. I need you here." Each word carried weight, each phrase a tether to life. During a brief lull, his mind wandered for a fraction of a second. She thought of her father who had died in a rural hospital when she was 16. She remembered standing at his bedside, holding his hand, begging him to fight. Back then, she had been powerless. Tonight, she refused to be powerless again. She pushed all fear aside. Logan was going to survive, no matter what it took. The surgical team wheeled him into the OR. Followed, scrubbed in, assisting where she could, her hands steady despite the adrenaline and fear. Logan's body was riddled with damage, each wound a potential death sentence. Yet, in that moment, felt something she had never felt before, an unwavering certainty that he wasn't going to die. After what felt like an eternity, the surgeon stabilized him enough for transfer to the ICU. Followed him to the elevator, her legs heavy but her mind alert. As the doors closed, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Logan Pierce, a Navy SEAL who had survived 20 gunshot wounds, owed his life to her hands, her voice, and her refusal to give up. Later, when the trauma room was finally cleared and sat down to catch her breath, she noticed the weight of what had happened pressing on her chest. The room had been chaotic, terrifying, and life-altering. She had faced death up close, and yet she felt strangely exhilarated. For the first time, she realized that nursing was not just about medication and vitals. It was about presence, courage, and determination. Didn't yet know that Logan's injuries were only the beginning. She didn't know that by keeping him alive, she had just stepped into a world of secrets, danger, and forces far beyond her training. The night had shown her the fragile boundary between life and death, and tomorrow, that boundary would shatter even further when the FBI arrived, pulling her deeper into a story that would test her courage, loyalty, and resolve like never before. As she left the ICU to grab a moment of water, paused outside the door. Logan's eyes had briefly flickered toward her before drifting shut. She didn't know if he had understood her words, but somehow, she felt that he had. And somehow, she knew that this was only the first chapter of a story neither of them could have predicted, a story of survival, courage, and secrets hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. For the night shift had begun quietly, but it had ended with blood, chaos, and a man who shouldn't have survived, but did because she refused to let him go. And that man, Logan Pierce, would change her life forever. Carter hardly slept that night. After the trauma bay chaos, she had been allowed a brief moment in a quiet corner of the hospital to catch her breath, but sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed every detail of the night. The flurry of hands, the smell of antiseptic mingled with iron-rich blood, the sound of monitors wailing as Logan's life balanced on the thinnest of threads. She felt a mixture of adrenaline, fear, and something else, responsibility. She had saved him once, but now in the ICU, the fight had only just begun. Logan Pierce lay on a hospital bed, tubes running into his body from every direction. The room smelled of disinfectant and the faint metallic tang of his blood still lingering in the air. His chest rose and fell shallowly, his body bruised and battered but alive. Adjusted the oxygen mask over his face and checked the lines, ensuring each IV was flowing correctly. He was stable for now. The ICU nurse on duty briefed quickly. "He's critical. Any sudden drop he could flatline again. Watch vitals constantly. Call me immediately if anything changes." Nodded, her hands already moving, eyes scanning the monitors. This was no longer just about medical procedures. This was about keeping a man alive who had been targeted for death. Stayed by his side, speaking to him softly. At first he didn't respond, drifting in and out of consciousness. But she continued talking, narrating her day, the hospital's quiet nights, anything to anchor him to reality. "You're safe here, Logan. You're still fighting and we're not letting you go." Her words seemed almost absurd in the sterile, alarm-filled room, but she refused to stop. Hours passed and rotated between monitoring vitals, checking IVs, and holding Logan's hand. His body was a battlefield of injuries, bullet holes in his shoulder, leg, and torso, bruising that stretched from neck to ankle, an internal trauma that required constant observation. Each beep on the monitor, each sudden twitch in his hand became a signal of life or a warning of death. Learned quickly that every second mattered. At one point, Logan's heart rate spiked and his blood pressure dropped dangerously. Shouted for help, initiating a rapid response. Doctors rushed in and assisted where she could, following every instruction, every motion precise. She inserted an additional IV line under pressure, applying saline to maintain his volume. Logan's pulse wavered dangerously close to zero. Leaned closer, whispering, "Breathe. You've survived worse. Keep going." During one of the brief pauses, allowed herself a flashback. She remembered her father's last night, lying on a hospital bed in a rural ER, tubes running in and out, his life slipping away despite the nurses' efforts. She had held his hand, pleaded for him to survive, and had been powerless. Tonight was different. Tonight she was in control, at least enough to make a difference. She would not fail again. Logan's eyes fluttered open for a moment, revealing a sharp intelligence and awareness despite the trauma. He glanced around the room, scanning exits, nodding the staff, even in his weakened state. froze at the intensity of his gaze. "Stay with me," she whispered again, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. For a moment she felt he recognized her voice, understood her presence as more than just a nurse's care. The night dragged on, and the team worked in shifts around him, but she remained by his side as much as possible. She cleaned wounds, replaced soaked bandages, and applied pressure to prevent further bleeding. Each procedure was critical. Each decision could mean life or death. Discovered reserves of courage she had never tapped before. Her hands moved with confidence born of necessity, her instincts sharper than ever. At one point, Logan's breathing became irregular, his chest sinking in shallow gasps. Called the doctor immediately. They intubated him again, stabilized his oxygen levels, and continued monitoring every vitals metric. Held his hand throughout, whispering words of encouragement, willing him to fight. In that moment, every sound of alarms and footsteps around her melted away. It was just her and him, two people against death. By morning, the adrenaline had faded, leaving exhausted, body aching but mentally alert. Logan's vitals stabilized enough that the doctors allowed her a brief step back. She watched him sleep, still battered, still fragile, but alive. She realized something profound. She had helped save not just a patient, but a man who had survived unimaginable circumstances. Her role had been small in some ways, monumental in others. Yet beneath the relief, a whisper of unease lingered. During one of his rare moments of consciousness, Logan had muttered, barely audible, "The bag, don't let them take it." Had no idea what he meant. Was it delirium? A hallucination from shock or medication? Or something more? Her curiosity gnawed at her, but she knew better than to pry too soon. He needed rest, and she needed to keep him alive. His colleagues began to whisper in hushed tones about Logan's identity and the circumstances of his injuries. Navy SEAL shot 20 times on U.S. soil, impossible, one nurse said quietly. Overheard snippets but said nothing. She had her own thoughts. Who would target him so violently? And why had she, of all people, been entrusted with his care at that critical moment? Throughout the day, his mind alternated between medical vigilance and worry. She noted the meticulous placement of each line, each dressing, each monitor, but also the subtle cues that something beyond medicine was at play. Logan was more than a patient. He was a man carrying secrets someone would kill for. His role had shifted from nurse to protector, from observer to participant in a story she had only begun to understand. As Part 2 drew to a close, remained by Logan's side, watching over every shallow breath, every twitch of pain, every flicker of consciousness. She understood that saving him was no longer about heroism or duty. It was about survival, intuition, and courage. In the ICU, surrounded by alarms and antiseptic, knew the battle was far from over. And she didn't yet know that the next day, when the FBI would arrive at her hospital asking questions, her life and Logan's would be pulled into a web of secrets, danger, and betrayal that would test every ounce of her resolve. Carter had been on her feet for nearly 24 hours. Her body ached, her eyes were gritty from exhaustion, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the previous night was finally ebbing. Yet she refused to leave Logan Pierce's side. Every monitor beep, every shallow rise and fall of his chest demanded her full attention. This was no ordinary patient. This was a man who had been shot 20 times, who had faced death multiple times in the trauma bay, and who, against all odds, was alive. It was just after sunrise when Logan stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing piercing blue eyes that seemed impossibly alert for someone in his condition. Leaned closer, gently checking his vitals. "Hey, you're awake," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. Logan's eyes scanned the ICU room with razor-sharp focus, and for the first time, saw that calm, methodical awareness she had glimpsed briefly in the trauma bay. His gaze lingered on the exit doors, on the monitors, on the subtle movements of the nurses around him. He spoke in a hushed, strained voice, barely audible. "Where the bag?" Froze, she blinked at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "The bag," she repeated softly, trying to keep her voice calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Rest, Logan, just focus on breathing. Logan's lips twitched, as if forming words too important to speak fully. He seemed lucid, despite the morphine and exhaustion. Noticed a faint tremor in his hands, but the tension in his eyes betrayed a trained alertness, not pain-induced confusion. He was assessing the room, evaluating potential threats, even while hooked to monitors and IVs. Had never seen someone so critically injured remain so aware. Hours passed. Logan's vitals remained fragile but was determined to keep him stable. She whispered stories of her night, mundane hospital details, minor observations, anecdotes about other patients to ground him. It seemed almost ridiculous in the face of his trauma, but hoped the human connection would help tether him to life. He listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes murmuring fragmented words, always alert. Yet that whispered phrase haunted her, the bag. She had no idea what it meant. Was it a piece of equipment, evidence, or something else entirely? Tried not to let her curiosity interfere with her duties, but a knot of unease settled in her stomach. Whoever shot him, or tried to, was not unknown, and was beginning to sense that she had been pulled into something much bigger than a routine ICU case. The day stretched on, rotated between monitoring vital signs, adjusting medications, and holding Logan's hand. During one brief moment of consciousness, Logan spoke again, his voice weaker but urgent. They'll come, don't trust. Leaned closer, straining to hear. Not all of them, he added, then drifted into sleep. Her heart raced. Logan was warning her. Someone who should have been focused solely on survival was thinking about threats, even from people in authority. Didn't yet understand the scope, but she realized that his injuries were only one layer of the danger he faced. The bullets had barely scratched the surface of the threat. By mid-afternoon, noticed subtle changes in the ICU. Hospital staff moved with unusual caution. Security personnel lingered near Logan's room longer than normal. A woman in a professional suit checked the visitor logs multiple times. Whispers circulated quietly among nurses and aides. Unease grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting, evaluating. She stayed closer to Logan than ever, aware that the room had become more than just a medical ward. It was a potential battlefield. During one fleeting moment of quiet, allowed herself to consider Logan's background. Navy SEALs were trained to survive extreme situations, but surviving 20 gunshot wounds on domestic soil suggested a carefully orchestrated ambush. Who would go to such lengths? And why? She couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that this was connected to something larger, something dangerous. Logan stirred again late in the evening, eyelids flickering as if he were trying to gauge his surroundings without fully waking. Adjusted the blanket over his legs, noticing the intricate patterns of bruising and scarring forming across his torso. Every wound told a story, and yet he had survived. His resilience was staggering, a testament to both his training and the care he had received. Felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. He was a survivor, but he was not yet safe. Then, in a whisper that barely reached her ears, Logan muttered again. Don't let them take it. His mind raced. Was this the same bag he had asked about earlier? She tried to stay calm, nodding softly, and whispered back, I won't, I promise. The moments that followed were tense. Noticed shadows at the edge of her vision, security guards standing just outside the ICU door, a man taking notes on a clipboard. Everything felt heightened. Every sound of footsteps in the hall seemed amplified. Realized that Logan's injuries were only the beginning of a story that had already started before he even arrived at the hospital. She had been caught in the middle of it, and there was no turning back. The night deepened. Colleagues worked tirelessly, but she remained by Logan's side, checking his lines, ensuring his oxygen, and keeping his hands warm. Each time he stirred, she whispered encouragements, reminding him that he had survived 20 gunshots. Each breath he took felt like a victory, each flutter of his eyes a reminder that she had a purpose. And then, just before midnight, Logan's gaze focused on her in a way that startled her. Even in his weakened state, there was a clarity, a recognition. "You saved me," he murmured. "I remember you." Squeezed his hand, not trusting her voice. She didn't yet understand what he remembered, but the connection was unmistakable. For a man who had faced death multiple times, he was choosing to focus on her presence. She realized that, for all his training, Logan Pierce was vulnerable in ways she could influence. She had become more than a nurse. She had become a guardian, a lifeline, and perhaps the only person in the world he could trust in that moment. As Part 3 drew to a close, understood that the ICU was no longer just a room for medical care. It was a crucible where trust, courage, and survival collided. Logan's whispered warnings, his fleeting moments of consciousness, and the subtle signs of outside surveillance hinted at a larger hidden conflict. Hands had kept him alive once, but the battles ahead would demand more than medicine. They would demand instinct, courage, and the willingness to step into danger she had never imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes were watching, waiting, evaluating. Didn't know it yet, but by morning the FBI would arrive, and her life, like Logan's, would be changed forever. Carter had slept little, if at all, since Logan Pierce's arrival. The ICU had become her world, a place of constant vigilance, where every beep, every movement, every faint flicker of consciousness demanded her full attention. Her hands were sore from hours of adjusting IVs, applying pressure to wounds, and holding Logan's own trembling hand. Yet she could not rest. She had a feeling that the night's horrors were far from over. That morning, as approached the ICU for her early shift, the hospital lobby had transformed. Federal agents, dressed in dark suits and armed with an air of authority, had stationed themselves in every corridor leading to Logan's room. The usual calm of the hospital had vanished, replaced by a sense of tension so thick it could be cut with a scalpel. His heart raced as she passed through the hall. Nurses whispered in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the agents. Security had doubled, and surveillance cameras seemed to have been repositioned. Something was happening, something she had no right to understand, but she felt it in her bones. Two agents approached her as she neared Logan's room. They introduced themselves, agent and agent, professional, composed, and yet carrying an intensity that sets nerves on edge. They requested that she step aside into a quiet hallway. "Carter," agent asked, his tone calm but firm, "we need to speak with you about the patient in ICU, Logan Pierce." His mind raced. She had no choice but to nod. "Yes, I'm his nurse. I've been with him since he arrived." The agents led her to a small conference room. They placed photos and documents on the table, images of a burned warehouse, photographs of a tactical, even blurry but detailed pictures of Logan's injuries before he arrived at the hospital. His pulse quickened as she glanced at the evidence. "We understand you treated Mr. Pierce during a critical incident," agent said. "We need to know exactly what he said, how he was acting, and any unusual statements or behaviors. This is a matter of national security." Swallowed, feeling the weight of their words. She described everything she could remember: the initial trauma, the chaos in the trauma bay, Logan's vital signs, and his rare moments of lucidity. But when it came to the whisper of the bag, she hesitated. That information was private, a fragment of trust between her and Logan, and revealing it now felt dangerous. I'm not sure what he meant by that," she said carefully. "He whispered something about a bag, but I didn't know if it was relevant or just delirium from shock." The agents exchanged a sharp look, leaned forward. "We believe it's very relevant. That bag contains evidence critical to a larger operation. We need your cooperation. Every detail could help us prevent further harm." Nodded, swallowing her anxiety. She was being pulled deeper into a world she had never anticipated, one where life and death, law and corruption, trust and betrayal all collided. After their questioning, returned to Logan's ICU room. The sight of him lying there, fragile yet alive, gave her a strange comfort. She adjusted his blanket, checked his monitors, and whispered, "You're safe for now." He stirred slightly, eyes flickering open, and focused briefly on her. Couldn't tell if he recognized the agents outside or understood the forces at play, but she sensed a silent acknowledgement of their trust. Throughout the day, noticed subtle changes in the hospital. Guards lingered longer than usual, checking visitor logs multiple times. Agents moved through corridors with careful purpose, speaking in coded tones. Began to realize that Logan's injuries were just the surface. The real danger, the true threat, was still unseen, hidden in the layers of bureaucracy, loyalty, and corruption. Later that afternoon, was called into a small break room by Agent. He handed her a confidentiality agreement and explained that she would need to limit conversations about Logan, even with hospital staff. The moment the words left his mouth, his unease deepened. She had dedicated herself to saving lives, but now she was being asked to guard secrets that could cost lives. As she returned to Logan's bedside, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. The man she had saved, barely clinging to life just 2 days ago, was now at the center of a national security storm. Every action she took, every word she spoke, could have ramifications far beyond the ICU. Logan stirred again in the early evening, leaned closer, careful not to wake him fully. He murmured almost inaudibly, "Don't trust them, not all of them." Froze, his voice was weak, but the warning was clear. She realized that Logan's whisper had not been delirium. It had been a deliberate caution, a signal that the people surrounding them, even those in positions of authority, might not be entirely trustworthy. Her mind raced. Who could she trust? The agents outside the door, the hospital staff, Logan himself. The answers were unclear and felt a growing sense of danger. She adjusted his oxygen mask and held his hand, silently vowing to protect him, even as the walls of authority and secrecy closed in around them. The evening passed in a tense blur. Kept watch as Logan drifted between consciousness and sedation, whispering encouragement and monitoring every vital sign. Outside, agents patrolled the hallway, occasionally glancing in, their expressions unreadable. Realized that she was no longer just a nurse. She was a guardian, a lifeline, and potentially the only person Logan could fully trust. As night fell, the hospital became quieter, but the tension remained. Thoughts kept returning to the whispered warnings, the mysterious bag, and the presence of the FBI. She understood that the coming days would be dangerous, that Logan's survival was not guaranteed even now, and that she had been thrust into a world where medical skill alone was not enough to keep someone alive. She glanced at Logan one last time before stepping out to take a brief moment of rest. His chest rose and fell, steady for now, but knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for his life had shifted from the trauma bay to a much larger battlefield, one that involved secrets, corruption, and danger that could reach far beyond the hospital walls. Carter, a rookie nurse only a few months into her career, had saved a Navy SEAL from death. But now she faced a different kind of battle, one where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and one where trust could mean the difference between life and death. And as she walked down the empty hallway, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above her seemed to whisper a warning. Nothing would ever be the same. The FBI had arrived, and with them came questions, suspicion, and a reminder that the line between ally and enemy was dangerously thin. This journey was no longer just about medicine. It was about survival, loyalty, and uncovering a truth that could change everything. Carter had begun to feel the weight of the hospital press down on her like never before. The ICU, once a place of healing, now felt like a fortress under surveillance. Every corridor seemed to hold eyes, every footstep echoed with unspoken purpose. After the FBI's sudden arrival and their questions earlier that day, realized she was no longer just a nurse. She had become a participant in a story far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Logan Pierce remained in ICU, fragile but conscious, his piercing eyes tracking every movement in the room. Even under sedation, his awareness seemed to extend beyond the bed, beyond the walls of the hospital, beyond the hospital staff who tried to mask their unease. Had never seen someone so critically injured maintain such vigilance. As she adjusted his IV line and gently applied fresh gauze to a burn near his shoulder, she noticed subtle but unusual changes in the hospital. Guards lingered near Logan's door longer than protocol dictated, their expressions unreadable. Hospital staff whispered in corners, their conversations abruptly silenced when approached. Even noticed a woman in a sleek suit, checking visitor logs repeatedly and observing the ICU from a distance. Something was happening, and unease grew with every passing hour. Late that afternoon, Logan stirred, his blue eyes flickering open, leaned closer, careful not to startle him. He rasped. His voice was weak, but there was a clarity in it that sent a shiver down her spine. "Don't trust them, not all of them." His pulse quickened. She had expected delirium or confusion, but this warning was deliberate. "Who?" "The agents," she whispered. Logan shook his head slightly, wincing from the pain. "Some inside, they want it, don't give them the bag." Her stomach tightened. The bag. It was the same mysterious object he had whispered about before, and now its significance was undeniable. Had no idea what it contained, only that it was crucial, enough that someone would orchestrate an ambush to kill him for it. Her mind raced. Who could she trust? And why had Logan's life been targeted on U.S. soil? Hours later, Agent returned, his demeanor calm but with an edge that unnerved. He handed her another document, a strict confidentiality agreement, and repeated the importance of limiting her conversations about Logan and the events surrounding his arrival. Hesitated. She had always valued honesty and transparency, but now keeping secrets was a matter of life and death. The tension escalated as returned to Logan's side. His breathing was shallow but stable, and his eyes followed her every movement. He murmured again, almost inaudibly. "Bag basement safe, only you." His heart raced. Safe. Basement. The hospital basement. Was he giving her instructions for protection? Or was this a test? She had never been involved in anything beyond medical care, yet here she was, being entrusted with a secret that could have lethal consequences. Later, ventured briefly into the hallway, ostensibly to check supplies. She noticed the unusual movements of hospital security, guards whispering into radios, scanning for unknown threats. The woman in the suit appeared again, observing the logs, her gaze sharp and unyielding. Realized the danger was not hypothetical. Whoever had attacked Logan was still out there, and now the hospital itself had become a stage for unseen power plays. That evening returned to the ICU, determined to focus on Logan's care, but she could feel the hospital's pulse, the tension in the air, and the silent eyes that seemed to follow her every step. Logan's hand twitched, and she instinctively held it, whispering words of encouragement. "You're safe, I'm here. I won't let anything happen." His eyes flickered open briefly, and he gave her a faint, almost imperceptible nod. It was trust. Realized that Logan, despite his injuries and near-death experience, had placed a piece of his survival in her hands. This was no ordinary patient-nurse relationship. This was life-and-death trust, and it terrified her. As night deepened, began to piece together the magnitude of the situation. Logan's injuries were not random. They were targeted. The bag was evidence, crucial enough that lives had already been endangered for it. The FBI's presence, while ostensibly protective, carried its own ambiguity. And Logan's whispers had revealed one undeniable truth. Some people she was supposed to rely on could betray them both. Stayed by his side, monitoring every vital sign, speaking softly to him, and keeping watch for any unusual activity outside the room. She realized that she had become Logan's protector, not just as a nurse, but as a guardian in a world she had never imagined. Every step she took, every decision she made, carried weight. She understood now that the hospital walls were no barrier against the dangers that had followed Logan into her care. At one point, Logan's eyes opened again. "Promise me you'll keep it safe," he murmured. squeezed his hand, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "I promise, Logan. Whatever it is, I'll protect it." Minutes later, she caught a shadow in the corner of the room, a movement so slight she almost questioned it. But her instincts screamed that someone was watching. Someone was evaluating her, assessing whether she could be trusted. She realized that the hospital had become a battlefield of trust, secrecy, and hidden threats. By midnight, sat in the chair beside Logan's bed, exhausted but alert. She reviewed his vital signs, checked every tube, every line, and every monitor. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who had attacked Logan? What was in the bag? Who could she trust? She had no answers, only questions, and a determination that she would keep Logan alive, no matter what. As she watched him drift into a fitful sleep, felt a profound shift in herself. She was no longer a rookie nurse tending to routine injuries. She had become a guardian, a protector, and a participant in a story of danger, secrecy, and life-and-death stakes that extended far beyond the hospital walls. The night was quiet now, but knew that the next days would bring revelations, confrontations, and a test of courage she had never imagined. For the stakes had changed. Logan Pierce's survival and the mysterious bag he had whispered about was now in her hands, and somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes were waiting, watching, and planning. The world she had known as a nurse had vanished, replaced by a reality where every choice carried consequences, and where trust and loyalty were as fragile as life itself. The next morning, the ICU was bathed in the pale light of dawn. Carter had barely slept, but exhaustion didn't matter. Logan Pierce had survived 20 gunshot wounds, death in the trauma bay, and now rested just a few feet away, fragile but conscious. Checked his vital signs, adjusted his oxygen mask, and studied his features. There was a determination in his eyes that no injury could suppress. Logan stirred and leaned closer. He looked at her with the intensity of a man who had carried secrets heavier than any physical wound. His voice was weak, but the clarity of his mind startled her. He began, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "You need to know what happened." His heart pounded. She had waited for answers, whispered warnings, and cryptic references to a mysterious bag. Now, she sensed the truth was about to unfold, and with it, the danger lurking just beyond the ICU walls. Logan took a slow, deliberate breath. "I was ambushed because my team discovered something they shouldn't have. High-ranking officials, corruption, illegal operations. We were going to report it and they came for us. I'm the only survivor." His hand shook as she held his. Her mind raced, trying to process what he was telling her. This was beyond a hospital emergency. This was a conspiracy. She had saved a man from bullets, but the enemy had survived in shadows, and now the threat was not just physical. It was institutional, insidious, and dangerous. "The bag," Logan continued, his eyes locking with hers, "it contains proof. Names, transactions, evidence. If it falls into the wrong hands, my team, anyone trying to stop them, will be eliminated." Felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't just about survival. This was about truth, justice, and lives on the line. Her role had shifted once again. No longer a nurse tending to injuries, she had become the keeper of critical evidence, an unlikely guardian of secrets that could shake the very foundations of power. Logan's voice grew faint as he detailed the ambush. "They knew where we were, every move planned. They had operatives, even in law enforcement. They wanted to make sure the bag never reached anyone who could use it against them. And now, they're watching. They've been watching since you saved me." His pulse quickened. She glanced around the room, suddenly aware of every subtle movement, every shadow at the corner of her vision. The hospital that had once felt safe was now a cage layered with hidden threats. Guards patrolled with unusual intensity, and the agents from the FBI seemed less like protectors and more like players in a game with rules she didn't yet understand. Logan reached for her hand again, his grip surprisingly strong. "I've been trained to survive situations like this, but I can't trust everyone. Not yet. You saved me when I couldn't fight. I need you to help me now. Keep the bag safe. Protect it until we can get it to someone who won't be corrupted." Swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had never imagined a situation like this. Her life had been dedicated to healing, to care, to following protocols. Now she was being asked to step into a world of danger, secrecy, and moral ambiguity. And yet she could not refuse. She had kept Logan alive once. She would do it again. Hours passed in tense silence. Monitored his vitals, applied fresh dressings, and spoke softly to him, grounding him in reality. Logan's strength had returned just enough to allow him to whisper fragments of information. He explained that the ambush had been executed with precision, that their attackers had inside knowledge, and that corrupt officials had manipulated events to conceal their crimes. Began to realize the depth of the danger. The hospital itself was no longer a safe space. The very people meant to uphold the law had been compromised, and Logan's life, already at the edge of death once, was now a focal point in a deadly game. She understood that her hands were not only keeping him alive physically, they were keeping him alive as a key witness to a conspiracy that could unravel if the evidence fell into the wrong hands. By mid-afternoon, Logan's condition stabilized. Leaned close, studying his bruised, bloodied form, she marveled at his resilience. Despite the physical trauma, his mind remained sharp, calculating, and alert. She had never met anyone like him. This man, injured and vulnerable, held secrets powerful enough to threaten lives, and yet he trusted her with them. "When I wake fully," Logan said, his voice weak but firm, "we'll need to move fast. They'll try to intercept us. They'll watch the hospital, watch the exits, watch everything. No one outside this room is completely trustworthy." Nodded, her resolve hardening. She had no choice but to trust her instincts, to protect Logan and the evidence at all costs. Fear coursed through her veins, but it was tempered by determination. She had saved him once. Now she would protect him and the truth against forces that could destroy them both. Late in the evening, reviewed hospital logs and notes under Logan's guidance. She realized that subtle surveillance had been present since his admission. Security had been manipulated, and agents had moved with a hidden agenda. Understood the stakes. Every detail mattered. Every oversight could be fatal. Logan's whispers grew intermittent as exhaustion him. Held his hand, spoke softly, and kept watch, aware that the danger had not diminished. The hospital, the people around them, even the agents meant to protect him, all were pieces of a puzzle she had to navigate carefully. As night fell, reflected on the events of the day. She had been thrust into a world of shadows and deceit, far beyond the simple life of a nurse. Yet she felt a strange clarity, a sense of purpose that transcended fear. Logan's survival, the bag, and the truth now rested in her hands. She understood that courage, vigilance, and trust, unwavering trust, would define the coming days. By midnight had settled beside Logan's bed, exhausted but alert. She adjusted his oxygen, checked the monitors, and whispered, "I'll keep you safe, Logan, I promise." He responded with a faint squeeze of her hand, his eyes briefly meeting hers. It was a silent acknowledgement. She had become more than a nurse. She was now a guardian of secrets, a protector of life, and a participant in a dangerous narrative that had only just begun. And somewhere beyond the walls of the ICU, forces unknown were moving. Agents, operatives, and insiders watched, calculated, and plotted. Didn't yet know the extent of their reach, but she understood one undeniable truth. Logan Pierce had survived against all odds, but the real battle, one of shadows, loyalty, and survival, was only beginning. Carter, the rookie nurse who had faced chaos and blood only days ago, now had to confront a world of secrets, corruption, and deadly stakes. And she knew deep in her heart that failure was not an option. Logan's life, the truth, and the mysterious bag depended on her, and she would fight for them no matter the cost. The night was heavy, the hospital corridors eerily silent, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Carter had never felt so alert in her life. Logan Pierce lay in the ICU, resting but still fragile, his body bruised and battered, yet his mind sharp as ever. She understood now that the real danger was no longer external gunfire or physical trauma. It was hidden, lurking in the shadows of those she thought she could trust. Logan stirred slightly, his eyes flickering open, leaned close. "It's time," he whispered. His hand trembled as he reached for hers, a signal that the next step was imminent. His heart pounded. The mysterious bag, which Logan had been so insistent on protecting, was in the hospital's secure storage, a place he could not leave in his condition. She understood that she had to retrieve it herself. Every instinct screamed caution, but every ounce of courage demanded action. She moved quickly, silently, through the hospital corridors. The security cameras she had noticed days before were still active, and guards patrolled with an intensity that suggested awareness of her every step. Kept her eyes on the path, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Reaching the storage room, she noticed the electronic lock, sophisticated military grade. Logan had whispered the code to her earlier and she entered it carefully. The door clicked open. Inside, the bag rested on a metal shelf, secured with locks and surveillance sensors. His fingers shook as she lifted it, feeling the weight of its contents, the weight of secrets that could topple powerful people. Just as she secured the bag, a shadow fell across the room, froze. A man in a suit, his face partly obscured, stepped into the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, controlled. Tightened her grip on the bag. "I'm taking this where it belongs. You're not touching it." The man's expression hardened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That bag, it's dangerous. You think you're protecting your patient, but you're in over your head." His mind raced. She realized this was no longer just a hospital dispute. The man was a threat, part of the same shadowy forces that had orchestrated Logan's ambush. She tightened her resolve. "I don't care, I'm taking it. You'll have to stop me." Suddenly, he lunged, attempting to seize the bag, dodged instinctively, heart hammering. Her training as a nurse did not include combat, but adrenaline and sheer will guided her movements. She sprinted toward the exit, hearing footsteps echo behind her. Back in the ICU, Logan stirred again, placed the bag beside him on the bed, speaking quickly. "It's here, Logan, I have it. We're not letting anyone take it." Logan's eyes, sharp despite exhaustion, met hers. "Good, now we move fast. They're not just watching, they're inside the hospital." Stomach tightened. The realization hit her. The threat wasn't outside. They had insiders, people who could manipulate every system, monitor every movement, and strike without warning. She glanced at the bag, feeling its weight not just in her hands but in her heart. Protecting it was no longer optional. It was a matter of survival. Hours passed in tense silence. Remained vigilant, monitoring every entrance and exit, every shadow and reflection. Logan whispered instructions intermittently, directing her on safe routes and contingency plans. Realized that the bag was more than just evidence. It was a lifeline, a key to exposing corruption, and potentially the only way to ensure that Logan's ambush was not repeated. Just as dawn approached, noticed subtle movements in the hallway. Figures dressed like hospital staff appeared, carrying clipboards, moving purposefully toward the ICU. Her pulse quickened. These were the insiders Logan had warned about. They weren't here for routine checks. They were here to take the bag. Acted quickly. She repositioned the bag under a sheet, concealing it from view, and adjusted monitors to draw attention elsewhere. Every step, every adjustment had to be precise. One wrong move, one misstep in the bag, and everything it contained could be lost. The intruders entered the room, their faces partially obscured. "Step away from the bed," one whispered. His hands trembled, but she stood firm. "You're not taking it, back away." Tension crackled in the air. Could feel the adrenaline heightening her senses. Every sound, every heartbeat, every breath seemed amplified. She realized that Logan's survival depended not just on medicine now, but on courage, intuition, and sheer nerve. Then a sudden betrayal revealed itself. One of the hospital staff, someone had trusted, subtly moved toward the intruders, signaling them. Stomach lurched. She realized the warning Logan had whispered days ago, not all of them, was manifesting before her eyes. Trust could be deadly. She had been relying on allies she now knew were compromised. Acted instinctively. She lunged, pushing the nearest figure away from the bed, and shouted for Logan to stay down. In the chaos, she grabbed the bag, securing it against her chest. A struggle ensued, brief but intense, her medical training replaced by survival instincts. Adrenaline fueled her movements, her resolve unshakable. When the intruders finally retreated, his body shook, sweat mingling with exhaustion and fear. The room was quiet again, but the sense of danger remained. She realized the hospital was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield where loyalty, courage, and quick thinking determined who lived and who died. Logan's eyes met hers, and for the first time since his ambush, a faint smile appeared. "You saved it. You saved me." His breath caught. She realized that the bag was safe for now, but the danger was far from over. Whoever had attacked Logan, whoever had insiders watching, would not give up easily. The stakes had risen, and understood that survival depended not just on protecting Logan, but on outsmarting forces far more powerful than she had ever encountered. That night stayed by Logan's side, holding the bag close, whispering reassurances. Her mind replayed the struggle, the betrayal, the narrow escape. She understood that courage was not just about physical action. It was about vigilance, intuition, and the willingness to face danger when the odds were impossibly stacked against her. As dawn broke over the hospital, felt a strange clarity. She was no longer just a rookie nurse. She had become a guardian, a protector, a fighter in a world she had never chosen but could not escape. Logan Pierce had survived 20 bullets, and together they would survive this web of betrayal, corruption, and danger. The bag rested beside Logan, heavy with secrets, evidence, and the weight of truth. Understood now that it was more than a piece of evidence. It was the key to exposing corruption, seeking justice, and surviving the shadows that stalked them. And she knew that the next steps would demand every ounce of courage, every instinct, and every ounce of loyalty she could muster. Carter, the nurse who had once merely healed injuries, now carried the burden of survival, truth, and protection. And as she settled in beside Logan, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, she knew that the final confrontation, the battle to protect life and truth, was approaching. The hospital was quiet, yet the air remained thick with tension. Carter had spent the entire night beside Logan Pierce, guarding the mysterious bag as if it were a part of him. Every muscle in her body ached, her mind raced with the events of the past days, and yet she felt an unshakable determination. Logan had survived 20 bullets. Now, they would survive the forces that still lurked in the shadows. Logan stirred, eyes flickering open, leaned closer, her hand gently brushing his damp hair from his forehead. "Morning," she whispered softly. "You're safe for now." He gave a faint, tired nod. "Thanks," he murmured. "I trust you. The bag, it's our leverage now. We have to move before they realize we still have it." Understood. The bag, heavy with evidence and secrets, was the key to exposing corruption, to stopping those who had orchestrated the ambush. But moving it required caution, strategy, and a steadfast courage that tested every fiber of her being. The hospital was not secure, had already observed the subtle signs, the lingering glances of security, the way agents whispered into radios, the unexpected movements of hospital staff. She realized that Logan's warning, not all of them, was more true than ever. Allies could be enemies, and the wrong step could be fatal. Together they devised a plan. Logan, though weak, directed to the safest routes in the hospital. They would move quietly, avoiding cameras and personnel who might be compromised. Every step was calculated. Carried the bag close to her chest, feeling its weight, not just the physical weight, but the gravity of the truth it contained. As they moved through the hallways, his mind raced with possible contingencies. She noticed subtle shadows at the edges of her vision, the faint click of shoes, the whisper of movement. Whoever had attacked Logan would not stop until the bag was back in their hands. Her role was clear: protect it at all costs and ensure Logan's survival. They reached the hospital basement, a dimly lit labyrinth of storage rooms, maintenance corridors, and stairwells. Logan had whispered earlier that it was the safest location to temporarily secure the bag until they could extract it from the city. Felt the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. Every corridor, every corner could conceal danger. As they descended the final flight of stairs, a figure appeared in the shadows. Agent froze, her instincts screaming caution. Logan tensed as well. "You shouldn't be here," whispered, recognizing the tension in his posture. His eyes softened, though the weight of suspicion lingered. "I'm here to help," he said quietly. "I can get you both out safely. The hospital is compromised. There are people here who will stop at nothing to get the bag." Glanced at Logan. He nodded subtly, his trust in her judgment clear. Together they followed through the dim corridors, the bag secure between them. The tension was palpable. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound echoed with potential danger. Finally, they reached a secure maintenance room. Placed the bag down carefully, checking the locks and ensuring it was hidden from view. Logan sank into a chair, exhausted but alert. Leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. Spoke quietly, "You've done well. Not many could have survived this far without losing control. The evidence in that bag, it's going to change everything. The ambush, the corruption, it all ends here." Nodded, realizing the truth in his words. Her role had been small in some ways, monumental in others. She had saved Logan, protected the evidence, and outmaneuvered forces that had already taken lives. Courage, intuition, and trust had guided her, and against all odds they had prevailed. Logan, though still battered, finally spoke at length. "The team, they trusted me with this mission. They would have wanted the truth out. You've kept it alive, kept me alive. That's more than I can ever repay." His eyes shimmered with exhaustion and emotion. "You don't have to repay me. I couldn't let them take you. I couldn't let the truth die with you." The hours passed, and with the dawn breaking outside, they prepared for extraction. Coordinated a secure transport, ensuring that the bag, and the truth it contained, would reach authorities untainted. Logan, and moved carefully, exiting the hospital through hidden routes, avoiding cameras and personnel who might compromise their mission. Outside, the first light of morning cast long shadows across the city streets. Felt a mixture of relief and vigilance. They had survived the ambush, the betrayal, and the threats within the hospital, but the fight was not yet fully over. The bag was safe, Logan was alive, and the truth was within reach, but there were still forces who would stop at nothing. As the transport vehicle drove away, Logan glanced at, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. "You saved me, more than once. I don't know how to thank you." Shook her head, her hand still gripping the bag tightly. "You don't have to, just survive. That's enough." The vehicle moved swiftly, navigating through the city to a secure location. Remained vigilant, aware that danger could strike at any moment. Yet for the first time in days, she allowed herself a sense of accomplishment. Against impossible odds, they had prevailed. Logan had survived, the bag had been protected, and the truth was still alive. At the secure location, federal authorities received the bag and its contents. Investigations began immediately, uncovering corruption, illegal operations, and the conspiracy that had orchestrated Logan's ambush. Watched from a distance, realizing that her actions, her courage, her vigilance, her willingness to step into danger, had changed the course of events. Lives had been saved, justice was being served, and the shadows that had loomed over them were finally being exposed. Logan, now in stable recovery, turned to, "You've done more than any nurse could ever be asked to do. You saved me, and you saved the truth. I'll never forget that." Smiled faintly, exhausted but proud. "I just did what I had to do. You're alive and the truth is out. That's enough for me." The days that followed were quieter. Logan continued his recovery and returned to her duties, forever changed by the experience. The hospital that had once been was now a place of reflection, where courage, loyalty, and trust had been tested to the limit. Understood that her life and Logan's had intersected in a moment of extraordinary danger, and together they had survived against all odds. The bag, now secure, symbolized more than evidence. It represented resilience, courage, and the triumph of truth over corruption. Knew that while the world might never fully understand what had happened in those days of chaos, she had witnessed something profound: the extraordinary impact of determination, trust, and the will to survive. As sat beside Logan one last time before returning to her duties, she realized that life, fragile as it was, could be saved in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, it took a rookie nurse, a severely wounded Navy SEAL, and an unwavering sense of courage to change the course of history.